So we were talking when we met, the four of us, to talk about why the world needs Triratna. That's what we were throwing around. And as we were talking about this verse came to me by Shantideva. So he's an 8th century monk. And he wrote this about the Dharma. This is the supreme medicine, curing the sickness of the world. A tree of shelter for weary creatures staggering along the road of existence. Just start my watch, sorry. So that means a lot to me, that image of the Dharma being as medicine. I think that's really true. I really think that's true. And it's certainly been true for me. So when I came along 11 years ago, I was really sick physically and mentally. And I think sick of something a bit deeper, something more existential. And everything that I've received since I've been coming here has been as medicine for that sickness. And I see myself less sick. And I'm fortunate enough to work here at the centre. And every time I come and I'm involved in a class, I see other people becoming less sick, taking the medicine of the Dharma and just flourishing and growing. And we've all been talking today in our groups about what Triratna has given us. And I imagine that all of us here can resonate with this sense of growing health, spiritual health and actual health, and our lives being transformed by the Dharma. So I really believe that this is true. I really believe that the Dharma is the only cure for the sickness of the world. And but to carry on this analogy, I then thought, but how is the Dharma administered? Because like medicine, the Dharma is very vast and broad, and there's a lot of it. And how do we know which of it to take that won't make us more sick? So I was thinking the importance of correct administration of the Dharma. And and this is what I think Triratna has to offer. And this is why I'd really just like to spend my time rejoicing in Bhante Sangharashta's clear and particular presentation of the Dharma. And in a way, I could just go on and on about that for hours, but I don't have hours. So what I'd like to do is just focus on one aspect of his presentation of the Dharma, which I find particularly important, beautiful, inspiring, and one that I would like to be around still at the forefront of everything in another 50 years. And that is the Bodhisattva ideal. So the Bodhisattva ideal is this ideal that enlightenment for one's own sake is not enough. And actually, enlightenment is to be attained for the sake of all beings. And the Bodhisattva is the being who treads the path towards the Bodhisattva ideal. Will never settle down for their own enlightenment alone. Will only settle for the enlightenment of all beings. So I think I'd like to share something quite personal with you, which seems quite nerve-wracking. It's such a massive group, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'd like to tell you about when I asked for ordination. So that was about 10 years ago, and it was my first retreat at Taraloka. I was quite new, and I was quite sick. And a lot of people on that retreat were also very sick. There was people dying of cancer, there were people who had terrible things happen in their lives, and they were all sharing that quite freely with each other. And it was the first time I'd really been presented with that level of suffering, I think, around me. And maybe the first time I hadn't just run away in the opposite direction from it, because I had to sit in a group and listen to people expressing their suffering. And I remember very clearly, as if it was yesterday, one day in a group, a woman was expressing some suffering. She was quite upset. And it's as if at that moment I suddenly saw the universal nature of suffering. It's a human condition. And at that moment, there was this voice that arose as if from outside of me saying, this suffering is no good. We need to get enlightened for the sake of all beings. And that was very clear. It just arose there in my experience. And it was as if my whole being orientated itself in a different direction in that moment. And actually, I don't think it's ever moved from that direction. And I suppose the reason I'm telling you that is because the very, very next thought that I had was I need to ask for ordination. So in fact, what happened is as soon as the group ended, I went and I asked the group leader for ordination, which I think surprised her quite a lot. And I've never regretted that. And I think the reason that was my next thought was because I knew that if I wanted to alleviate the suffering of all beings, I could not do that on my own. I needed to be part of something much, much bigger than me. And I had a very strong sense that Triratna was that thing that I needed to be part of. And I suppose even though I was very new, I had faith in the fact that Triratna was such a body that could carry that could really make a difference in the world. And in this connection, we have the myth of Avalokiteshvara, which I've always loved. So Avalokiteshvara is the quintessence of compassion, the Bodhisattva with 11 heads and 1,000 arms, all of which are there in order to help alleviate the suffering of beings. And he who broke up into those parts because he was overwhelmed with being unable to do that on his own, needing a bigger body, just like we all do, to make that difference. And I feel very fortunate that Bhante Sangharakshita has offered us this vision, this myth of Avalokiteshvara for our order and movement, that we all could consider ourselves to be hands and arms of Avalokiteshvara, all offering ourselves our own unique qualities, our own unique beauties and skills, but part of one body, so moving in harmony together, and out of that arising the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling jewel that alleviates all the sufferings of the world. And I'm so happy that we have that myth for our order and movement, because I think it evokes that at its best, we have this enormous potential for doing good in the world, working together. And although we don't always manage it, of course, the fact that we have this myth means that we can persistently raise ourselves towards it. The ceiling is not going to stop us. The ceiling is farther away than we could ever reach, in a way. And it might sound a bit far-fetched sometimes, but actually I've really experienced Triratna like this, you know, at moments when I've been with a large group, on Sangha retreats, on order events, even on beginners courses and Sangha night, when there's a lot of people there and they're all sharing this vision and this myth of raising themselves up towards what's beautiful. Really something quite remarkable can start to happen, even in those sort of fairly mundane situations, really. So why am I talking about this now? I think this is, the Bodhisattva ideal is obviously timeless. It will always apply, it's always applied. But why I want to talk about it, why I chose it to talk about it now, is because I think at this moment in society, this sort of myth is even more crucial than ever, actually. When I look around me, I see a society which seems very divided, very full of hate and blame. And I also see a society which seems very individualistic and quite selfish. And I think this is our conditioning. We've been nurtured in a society whose economic and social systems encourage us to think of ourselves and our immediate families and to prioritise them. And I think because that's our conditioning, what am I getting out of this? What's in it for me? So difficult not to translate that into our Dharma lives and just to think, well, what am I getting out of this? Actually, I'm meditating, my ethical practice, my study. How much of it really is about other? How explicit is the altruistic dimension in my practice? And I think the Dharma, if we're not careful, can easily become like the ultimate self-help tool. And I think that's a terrible waste of such a beautiful and precious thing. And also it's very limiting, because obviously in the end there's no difference between self and other, and we can't really do it unless we let go of that distinction. So I think going forward into the next 50 years, unless something amazing changes, I think the Bodhisattva ideal will be crucial to help replace these stories of what's in it for me that we've all grown up with into other stories like what's in it for us, or maybe just even what's the most beautiful, what is most beautiful here. So I'd like to rejoice in Bhante Sangharakshita for having giving us the gift of this beautiful myth that we can keep raising ourselves up to, this beautiful and grand myth, which stresses that actually the heart, the beating heart of the order and the movement is altruistic in nature. That is really at the centre of what we're doing. And I hope that in another 50 years, when we're having Triratna 100, the Bodhisattva ideal is still very much at the forefront and the beating heart of what we're doing in Triratna. Thank you very much.